Have you ever wondered, how does my brain work? Me too. It's a big question, and it's difficult to answer. So, how do we learn about the brain? We use model systems. Wait, no, not those kinds of models. More like these kinds of models. What is a model system? They're species of animals that are studied to answer questions about biology, including questions about the brain. Model systems are used because many parts of life, including aspects of our genetic code, metabolism, and development, are conserved through evolution. So things we learn from animals can tell us about ourselves, too. In neuroscience, we know that animal brains can look different to ours in size and shape, but they share some fundamental structures and functions. So brains from monkeys or mice or even tiny fruit fly brains can give us insight into how our own brains work. You may ask, why not just study human brains? Well, it can be hard to nearly impossible to study certain phenomena in the brain because, well, we're using them. Not only do people generally not want to volunteer to give up their brain while they're alive, but neuroscientists don't even really want to ask. In addition, using a model system allows scientists to control conditions like genetic mutations or environmental conditions like temperature, diet, or any drug testing in experiments that can't really be done with people. So, what makes a good model system? Well, ideally it's an animal that can be bred in the lab, so you can control genetics and have enough animals to study. Although some neuroscientists study things like crabs or lobsters or kinds of reptiles that can't be bred. Second, model systems need to be housed in the lab. It wouldn't be possible to keep something like a whale or a cow in the lab. And finally, perhaps most importantly, can it answer your question? If you want to understand how the brain controls breathing, you wouldn't study a worm that doesn't have lungs. So now you know what a model system is and why we study it. But what do we learn from model systems? For just a second, I want you to imagine a model system. What did you think of? Probably mice or rats. That's probably because they're studied a lot, across all different types of biology. They're not the only model system that's been used to study the brain, though. We're going to talk about many animals, but let's start with rats and mice. You could say they're the heavyweight champs of biological research. They've been used to study many neuroscience topics, including brain organization, pharmacology, or how drugs affect the brain, neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, how the immune system affects the brain, spatial navigation, or how we perceive the 3D world around us, how the brain develops, learning and memory, and the way that brain cells communicate, synaptic transmission. But they're not the only or even the first systems used to understand these topics. Neuroscientists use simpler model systems to understand the electrical nature of the nervous system. They discovered ion channels in the frog and studied the giant axon in the squid to understand action potentials. These are big spikes of electrical activity that travel down axons to synaptic terminals. We'll talk about action potentials more another time. The tiny fruit fly has been used extensively to study how the nervous system develops. Recently, the zebrafish is being studied more and more. Even a microscopic worm called a nematode is studied to understand the nervous system. It only has 302 neurons compared to our 100 billion, which makes it incredibly valuable to study how neurons and their connections develop. Importantly, these systems let scientists control the genes in the animals being studied, which helps us to understand which genes affect how our brains grow and function. When it comes to function, scientists have used several model systems to understand how the brain learns and forms memories. Famously, the sea slug aplysia was used to perform foundational experiments about learning. Of course, learning and memory is also studied in other systems, including flies and mice. We've all heard of mice and mazes, which are actually important experiments that led neuroscientists to understand how our brains process the space around us, and how the brain itself is organized to do this. Even bats are now being studied to understand spatial navigation, interestingly, because they get more sensory input from echolocation than from vision. Songbirds have helped scientists understand auditory learning. Knowing how songbirds learn their songs from other birds has implications for speech production and how we learn language. Almost 50 years ago, scientists studied cats to understand the visual system, though cats are not commonly used in neuroscience experiments anymore. Some groups study monkeys or primates to understand vision and even cognition. Perhaps one of the cooler model systems is the axolotl. It's known for being the smiliest, cutest amphibian boy, and they can regrow limbs and tails after losing them. Axolotls are being studied to help us find new treatments for spinal cord injuries. Most of the model systems we've talked about have another important thing in common. They've all produced Nobel Prize-winning work. So the next time you see a mouse or a fruit fly around your bananas, or don't see a microscopic nematode when you're digging in the garden, but it's there, take a moment to appreciate all we've learned from these model systems. Model systems, you're awesome. We're the Ascend program, advancing STEM community engagement through neuroscience discovery. A bunch of neuroscientists based out of the FAU Brain Institute, the Scripps Research Institute, and the Max Planck Florida Institute for Neuroscience. If you like these neuroscience videos, give us a like and subscribe. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. For educator resources, please use the link below in the comments. We're powered by the Stiles-Nicholson Foundation, the South Florida Science Center and Aquarium, and the Florida Atlantic University Brain Institute. Our goal is to ignite curiosity about brain science. Please leave us a comment below with different neuroscience topics that spark your interest. Thanks for watching!